Hello and welcome to Everyday Good, podcast where we take a small slice of life and explore how the person and work of Jesus is good in the midst of it. In anxious situations, we sometimes talk to ourselves internally or maybe even out loud. Some of our conversations can be quite negative and we want to change, but doing that can be challenging. I'm your host, Laura Kleinschmidt, and in this episode, we will be talking about negative self-talk. Today, my guest is Anna Wojtul, and I'm just really excited to have you, Anna.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I would love to hear a little bit about your season of life. Would you be willing to share that?
Yeah, so I am in my 30s, single, kind of still early in my career because I took a long time to figure out what I wanted to do, but I currently work as a copy editor for a surgical journal. So that's where I'm at.
That's great. And then you have some hobbies too. Could you share that?
Yeah, I love knitting. That's probably the main one. I'm obsessed with knitting. And I also like to write poetry.
Oh, that's great. And you have an interesting talent. You actually taught me something recently, and it was how to kill centipedes from a great distance away.
Yeah. I wouldn't call that a hobby.
Well, Anna, you were sharing with me the other day a little bit about a situation.
Yeah, so I struggle with social anxiety. So when I'm in a group of people who I don't know really well or an unfamiliar situation, I get really anxious, kind of panicky, withdraw into myself, and don't really know what to do. And there's a certain feeling I get that I hate that feeling so much. So a lot of times throughout my life, I've avoided going to things because I didn't want to feel that way. So that's kind of been a lifelong struggle. And a recent example of when I had to deal with it was a wedding that I went to a few weeks ago, where I didn't know a lot of people at that wedding. I think I just knew the bride and one other person who was there. And I thought I was going to be okay because I had my one friend, and I was like, I can just talk to my friend all night. Yeah. But I kind of got caught off guard because there was a moment when we were all sitting at our table where she and her husband were talking to another couple, and I wasn't really part of that conversation, so I didn't really have anyone to talk to. And there was this girl sitting next to me who I didn't know. We made eye contact, just did the basic introductions, told each other how we knew the bride. And after that, I didn't know what to say to her anymore. But I had this feeling that I should be talking to her. And so I was just very stressed out about that for a pretty good portion of the evening, just thinking like I can ask her a follow-up question about our introductions. I can think of something to say, but I couldn't think of anything to say because I was so nervous. And I thought that I'm probably going to, if I think of anything to say, I'll be too quiet and she won't be able to hear me and I'll have to repeat myself and it'll be awkward. The thought that I remember thinking to myself is, how unlucky is this girl that she got stuck sitting next to me who can't figure out how to make a conversation?
Oh.
What situation do you have that's similar?
Yeah. It's not that similar, but it does involve talking to myself. Actually, it was just one morning last week. I happened to wake up early. So I decided to grab a few things from the grocery store and even lift weights at the gym before I got ready and headed to work. And on my way home from the gym, I got this message that said, I'm running late for our meeting this morning due to the weather. I'll be there at 8:10 instead of 8 a.m. And then I remembered I had an 8 a.m. meeting that day, and my stomach dropped as it was 7:40 a.m., and I live 15 minutes away from my work. And I had not showered, I had no makeup, and my hair looked wacky. Additionally, the person I was meeting was driving in from the city. I live in the suburbs. She woke up early to meet me. So it was a significant drive for her. Also, I'm the one who suggested we meet at 8. So in the car, I had some words for myself. I kept saying out loud, you're an idiot. You're an idiot. How could you have forgotten this? You just scheduled the day before and totally forgot. What an idiot. And I went on and on like this for most of the time before the meeting. I think I probably used the word idiot like like 30 times in the car. It was a lot. Interspersed with phrases like, what were you thinking? So you and I have similar situations in that we're speaking to ourselves. In these little slices of life, we want to look at where our hearts are in the midst of these things, situations. Or have you brainstormed on that, what the root might be?
I think the root of that would be found in the negative self-talk and just the being extremely hard on myself. And thank you for sharing your story as well. I definitely related to some of the things you were saying. Like, I've called myself an idiot before. I've called myself a failure. That's the word that I use with myself. Being super hard on yourself can be a result of pride just as much as being really puffed up and arrogant can, because in both situations, it's extremely self-centered. And that's how it is in these situations. I'm only thinking about myself when I'm talking to myself that way and when I'm kind of lost in the anxiety of the situation. And it goes so far as even when I think about the other person in that situation, I'm thinking about them in terms of how it relates back to me. Like, what are they thinking about me, and just worrying about the impression that I'm making to them. And it's just all about me. So there's definitely pride in there. Like I'm trying to bully myself into acting a certain way. Yeah. And it doesn't work.
I think really I was sort of doing the same thing, trying to bully myself into, okay, next time I'm going to remember.
But the reason that I become so frustrated, I think, is because I put my sense of value and worth in this person that I think I should be. And so when I can't make it there, it can feel kind of devastating.
Yeah, so this is kind of connected with identity. There's this ideal person that you're looking to be. And if you can't get there, that night at the wedding, it's all over. Game over, right?
Yeah.
So, you're sharing that reminds me of my just saying idiot all the time, and for forgetting an appointment that I had. When I think about, okay, why do I beat up on myself? Why am I verbally attacking myself when I forget a meeting? I think it's sort of similar. I'm trying to get myself to perform in a certain way, to remember meetings. And I have this expectation of myself that I should be able to remember every meeting, every appointment with 0% failure rate. Years ago, I worked as a software engineer on a public radio system for police and fire. And we sought to create these systems so they would have no failure. Now, because the world is not perfect, we would go for what we called 6 Sigma, which is a quality term, which means there's 3.4 defects per million opportunities. I'm getting a little geeky on you. But anyway, I kind of feel like my expectations of myself are like that. And I think that's at my root. It's my desire to perform perfectly, or at least near perfectly, in remembering things. So I want to do things right. I want to do them well and on time all the time. And like you, it's a lot of pressure. So I'm both the judge of myself and at the same time the receiver of the judgment. So how is the person and work of Jesus good in the midst of your situation?
Yeah, so it really helps me to remember that Jesus is my refuge. When I'm scared and withdrawn in a social setting, or when I don't even go out of that fear, it's kind of like I'm hiding, or I'm trying to seek refuge within myself. But it turns out that I'm not actually that safe because of the negative self-talk and how harsh and cruel I can be to myself. But that is not how Jesus is. It's the way that Jesus deals with me is almost the opposite. He's kind and gracious to me. I know that I'm fully known and loved by Jesus. He promises to give me peace and rest and to walk with me through my struggles. And I know that he'll never leave me or forsake me, even when I make mistakes. And that, I think, is true safety and true security. And I can't find that in myself. But a verse that really speaks to me is Psalm 139:18. And that verse says that God's thoughts about me outnumber the grains of sand. So I'm never unnoticed or unseen by God. He's always caring and thinking about me to an extent that I can't even comprehend. And that's just amazing to me and really encouraging.
Yeah. The number of grains of sand is an astounding number.
Yeah.
When this happens, when you're in this type of setting, do you engage with God at all? Or if you do, what's that conversation sound like?
I guess the answer is yes, but not always as quickly as I should.
I could say the same thing. Yeah.
There are times when I remember to kind of bring God into the conversation when I know I'm going to be at a social event, and so I can pray beforehand. And when I do that, it's kind of talking to God, but reminding myself of my identity in Christ.
Yeah.
Like I'll pray to God and say, I know that you love me. I know that I'm created in your image and that I'm valuable to you. And I know that you're with me. And I ask him to help me make it through the event. It doesn't even have to go amazing. Just help me get through it.
Yes.
But doing that beforehand is really helpful because then it kind of changes my mindset going into it. I'm not only focused on my expectations and what I want to get out of the situation. I've just laid it out before the Lord and kind of focused my mind on him. And so that can help me be a little more at peace going into it. I pray in the moment sometimes too when I'm feeling anxious, and that's usually just a quick God, please help me type of a prayer.
Yeah.
Because I know that he knows what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
And I find that when I do seek him in the midst of the struggle, that he does help me. And it doesn't necessarily look like me magically turning into this charismatic person that I wish I could be. And it also doesn't necessarily look like the anxiety going away, but I'll feel more of a sense of peace in the situation. And I'll be reminded that I'm not alone and that God is walking with me. So I know that I can lean on him, and that kind of helps me to calm down a little bit.
So reaching out to him, talking to him, even just saying help is a wonderful thing to do. Is there anything that you do to engage with others through this? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, first of all, it looks like actually forcing myself to go to things, even though I know I could feel anxious. And I've grown a lot in that area. Years ago, I was more on the don't go to things side, and I've kind of
just avoid those situations.
Yeah, to avoid it, to not have to deal with it. So I was kind of a little bit isolated and lonely in a time of my life back in the day because of that, and that's a whole different story. So actually getting myself out there is one way, I guess, to engage with others faithfully. I think one of the questions you asked me when we were talking before kind of stood out to me, which was, how do you show intelligent love to others? And that was something that with my social anxiety, I hadn't really ever thought of before. And I talked about how it's very self-centered, and I think about other people only in terms of how it relates back to me. And so it was kind of a challenge almost to be like, oh, well, how do I turn that around then and, faithfully love others, even though I'm so afraid of them? Yeah. And I have one idea, which is that I have sometimes been honest with people about the fact that I struggle with social anxiety, which is a little bit hard because then you have to be vulnerable. I'll say something kind of keep it lighthearted, just say, oh, I feel weird and panicky in social situations, because I think that wording is a little bit humorous, so it can get a chuckle out of people. But then I've also kind of cleared the air, and then I feel better knowing that they know that I don't seem distant because I've lost interest in them or I don't care about them. It's just because I'm scared. Yeah. And then I think that me being honest about my struggle can also open the door for someone else to be honest with me in return. So that's a way to get a conversation started. Yeah. And then we can maybe commiserate with each other or encourage each other. Or maybe we're both shy and awkward, and so the conversation doesn't go anywhere, but at least it's been said.
You talked about identity before, and I feel like in order to do that, your identity needs to be secure in something, right? Or else you won't take that risk.
Yeah, so how does Jesus show up for you in your situation?
Yeah, I think you said this when you were sharing. What's been helpful to me is to remember I am created in the likeness of God. So when I'm beating up on myself, I'm actually beating up on someone who is bearing the image of God. So that's been a helpful thing for me to remember. And as I shared before, I have this desire to perform perfectly, or at least near perfectly. But I'm faced with this reality that I'm flawed, and I will sometimes forget things. So who's Jesus in that? Well, he lived the perfect life that I could never live. He did all things right and well in his entire life. And if I look to Jesus as only my example, which he is, I could feel crushed and back to beating myself up. But he's not just my example. He's also my Savior, which is good to remember. I was thinking about these verses. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9 has been really helpful. For by grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It's the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. So what this is saying is God's really given me a gift of salvation. He saved me from my supposed need of performing perfectly. And his love acceptance of me is not based on my works or my performance. And that just makes my heart soar. And I think about, when we're talking about the roots, and it reminds me of gardening, where we see a weed, and instead of just yanking it out at what we see above the ground, which for us, it's this negative self-talk at ourselves, we're trying to examine the root that's underneath it. So we get a trowel out and dig it out. So I feel like our conversation today is the work we're doing to dig that out. And that trowel is what God has done for me and through Jesus. So with that trowel, I can dig out the root of perfect performance thinking. And while I'm doing that, also the verbal beating up on myself gets dug out along with it, which is really helpful. And then what does it look like to engage with God in that situation? Well, I started waking up to what I was doing in that situation in the car as I was driving, and I just started talking to him honestly. It took me a while. This is like 20 minutes into it, but I just started talking to him honestly, just saying, I'm so sorry for beating up on myself. I am tarnishing the image of God in me, so just forgive me for that, and Lord, just forgive me for my self-focus on my performance. It was good you brought that up, self-focus, because I struggle with the same thing. I realized that through this, I was focused on me. I wasn't really thinking much at all about the person who was waiting for me. Also, I'm not sure how much I did this then, but I can thank God that his love and acceptance of me is not based on my performance, but ultimately on Jesus's performance on the cross for me. And then what does it look like to love others in that situation, that intelligent love that you brought up? Well, I can let the other person know I'm running late and apologize to her, which I did do. And faith lived out also means driving at a reasonable speed. So when this happens, I'm usually trying to make up for it. I still want to look good here, and I want to do it good. So I'm going to drive 20 miles over the speed limit. Well, maybe not that fast, but you know what I mean?
There too.
Okay. All right. So you can relate. I'm not loving other people on the road when I'm speeding. And then also I can just try to be focused on the person I'm meeting with, listening well, being attentive to what she's saying. All right. So we've been talking about our responses, our situations, responses, our fruits, who's Jesus in that. How about, let's just talk about what is good. This is Everyday Good, where we're talking about the work of Jesus in the midst of it. We've touched on it a little bit, but do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So what I think is so good is that Jesus is so accessible. All of the hope and peace of Christ are not things that I have to work and strive for. I just have to open the Bible and just remember that they're there. I love what you said when you were talking about how Jesus doesn't love us for anything that we've done. And those are the standards that I kind of hold myself to, where I am not happy with myself unless I can do all these things that I need to be doing. With Jesus, he loves me in spite of everything I do wrong. And it's because of his work that he's done that we can put our trust and faith in. And that's just such a blessing to be able to have that hope. Yeah, whereas the message that I often give to myself is, what's wrong with you? Do better. The message that I get from Jesus is, I love you, come and rest. And I don't have to go very far to find that hope.
Yeah. I love that, how you are switching out your words for his words. Well, similarly, I was thinking of, when we're beating ourselves up, I'm actually kind of trying to wound myself for not doing the right thing, like you. And I can think of Jesus's wounds that he bore for me in order to save me from my self-imposed verbal tirade. I love this verse. By his wounds we are healed. He went through that for me on the cross for me, so I wouldn't have to do this verbal beating up. I wouldn't have to perform to this level. And also, Jesus doesn't call me idiot. So I'm trying to do this replacement thing too. He's got a different word. He calls me beloved. And I'm reading through 1 John now, and the word beloved pops up again and again. And it's really God's name for those who believe and trust in him. And I want to remember that, not idiot. Take that word away and replace it with the word beloved. He knows I'm flawed, and he loves me anyway and accepts me anyway. And it just makes me really happy and joyful. It brings me rest, security, and peace. And it might bring me a little lower blood pressure too. So I don't know about that. I haven't tested that out. But well, thanks so much, Anna, for coming by. I just have really appreciated this conversation. It's been really good to talk. And I really appreciate you sharing openly and honestly.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It was a great talk. I loved hearing from you too.
Oh, good. I'm glad we both enjoyed it. This is Everyday Good, a podcast where we take a small slice of life and explore how the person and work of Jesus is good in the midst of it.